Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for joining us for Alaska weather tonight on this December the 27th. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily with the Alaska Weather Information Line. You know the number by heart, just like I do, 1-800-472-0391. Write down the numbers that you use. If you're on St. Lawrence Island, that's 123. Anywhere else, write those numbers down. I don't have yours memorized just yet, just like the folks out in Savunga and Gamble do. However, you can use that to get information toll-free anywhere from your location in Alaska. And if you've got broadband service, weather.gov/Alaska is a great way to get your local weather information. Go to weather.gov/Alaska, click on the map, click on it one more time, and that localizes your forecast. Save that to your bookmarks in your home screen, and you'll be good to go. If you want something for your mobile device, or you have a low bandwidth connection that you really want to save on the data, try mobile.weather.gov. Save that to your mobile device home screen. Once you punch in your location, you'll be good as gold there. It works just like an app, and that's from your National Weather Service here in Alaska. If you can't find what you're looking for, please let me know. I'm happy to serve you any way I possibly can. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is how you find me. Let's take a look at what's going on. We have a whole lot to talk about tonight, and we're going to start in southeast and around Hyder once again. A winter storm warning during the overnight hours into tomorrow morning. We're talking about 10 to 13 inches of new snow possible in and around Hyder. That looks like that will continue to crank up as we head through tonight as a powerful system's moving through the Gulf and pushing a front into parts of southeast. Storm warnings all the way around the outer coast and into northern parts of the Gulf, and with some of that wind also working its way into the inside passage there, we have gales out for many locations, but we have more snow heading up toward Haines and around the Klondike Highway. Because of that, 6 to 9 inches of new snow is forecast, generally above 800 feet, so it won't take you very long to get up above where that snow line begins. And it could wind up being about 6 to 9 inches of snow starting through this evening hours and really cranking up during the overnight and winding down early tomorrow morning. As we move westward into the Copper River Valley, we're finding more snow there, about 4 to 7 inches of new snow possible around the Copper River Valley, around Glen Ellen and Gulkena. That'll be tonight and into tomorrow as well. A blizzard warning is in effect for Thompson Pass right now, looking for about 6 to 10 inches of new snow, and gusts to 55 could really reduce visibility there, so plan on blowing snow and tricky travel through Thompson Pass. Into Whittier and also Seward. In areas around Moose Pass, we're expecting to see about 4 to 8 inches of new snow there. Winter weather advisory is in effect tonight and into tomorrow morning. For the higher terrain areas around Moose Pass, 8 to 10 inches of snow could be possible there. And we're watching for gusts about 35 miles per hour. That will reduce visibility in Seward, Whittier, and again, some of the passes there in the interior of the Seward Peninsula. On the other side, a winter weather advisory is also in effect for tonight into tomorrow, about 2 to 4 inches of snow there, and at times some gusts around 30 to 35 miles per hour. That could bring visibility down. It's not a winter storm warning, but it might make travel tricky on the Sterling Highway and southward toward the Homer Bluffs. As you look northward into the eastern Alaska range, a winter weather advisory is posted there for additional snowfall, again about 4 to 8 inches of snow, and blowing snow could reduce visibility there if you're traveling through the passes. Everything north has to do with cold weather, and we'll get back to the rest of the warnings here in just a minute, but I want to show you something that the satellite saw this morning with the extreme cold that we're hearing about across the interior. As I always talk about, the satellite picture shows us where the cold is sometimes. Even if we're not seeing clouds, we are seeing a cold temperature. And the way this works is the infrared satellite picture senses the temperature of the air and likes to assume that a lot of it's cloud cover. In this case, it is not, and we're using it to detect the cold spots. And as you can see here, south of Anaktuvuk Pass, all the way out toward Ambler, in the nooks and crannies and the valleys, all the way out toward Galena, and north and west of Anderson and Minto, in Manly Hot Springs, and all the way up toward Fort Yukon. You can see that the area is estimated and highlighted in blue are about 40 degrees below zero and even colder. Some of the pink shades here were in the 60-degree range below zero. We know that Manly Hot Springs reported a temperature today 67 below zero. That is some serious cold, and some of the coldest temperatures we've seen in at least several years in that area. And because of that, and because of the wind moving through, wind chill warnings are still in effect for areas in the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys for Ambler and the southeastern Brooks Range, as well as the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. If you're in a wind chill warning, that means your wind chill values are anywhere from 55 to 65 below, expecting that to continue at least through Saturday morning. And in some cases, we might actually see that go until Sunday. The good news is there is some milder weather coming your way. I'm not going to say warmer. The temperature trend is going to go up, but it's not going to be warm yet. It's just going to be milder, let's say. Anywhere in yellow across the AKwx Valley, the upper Yukon, all the way out toward the Yukon Delta, the Seward Peninsula, and the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys, this entire region is under a wind chill advisory. That means your values could be somewhere between 45 and 55 below. And again, no matter if it's 45 or 65 below, it only takes 10 minutes or less to get some extreme frostbite going. So make sure you're using extra precautions and safety measures to keep you, your family, and your kids safe. Know where they are. Make sure you're limiting exposure outside. Don't go out if you don't have to right now. A winter weather advisory is in effect for our friends in Gamble and Savoonga and St. Lawrence Island there. Additional snowfall could give you another 2 inches of snow tonight, but snow and blowing snow is likely, with gusts to 55 miles per hour through the nighttime hours and into early tomorrow morning. Southwest wind chill advisories in effect for you. Again, 45 to 55 below for Bristol Bay, all the way up toward Bethel and the Kuskokwim Delta, so be careful there. That'll go through tomorrow morning. And then finally, we're going to end on Kodiak Island. A blizzard warning is in effect for your area. That is somewhat unusual in recent years anyway. It used to be a little bit more normal in the wintertime. But for Kodiak, expecting a good 4 to 7 inches of snow, at least in the area, and gusts to 50 miles per hour at times that could really bring whiteout conditions at least for a little while tonight and into tomorrow. Early tomorrow morning, probably about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, winds are going to turn and blizzard conditions will just be done. It'll just be all over. So enjoy the snow while you have it. Some cases you might have as much as 7 to 11 inches of snow. The wind, again, with gusts to about 50 miles per hour at times, could create whiteout conditions for you. Here's a look at the weather system. Remember, we were talking about this yesterday. If that low pressure system lined up just right, then blizzard conditions or a heavy winter storm could be possible. And that's exactly what's happening tonight. That triple point moving into prime position just north and east of Kodiak and just south of Seward. In the meantime, a front is working towards southeastern Alaska, bringing in more moisture. Not as much wind as last time, which is good for you. But rain and 37 degrees in Juneau. It sounds like a fine winter day. Southeasterly is working up the Lynn Canal into Haines. So again, more snow there, above 800 feet this time. Snow and wind for many in the Copper River Valley, parts of the Kenai Peninsula, and again in Anchorage expecting more snow. And then just bitter wind and bitter cold for the interior as we go from tonight and in through the rest of the weekend, with low pressure working its way and hovering very close to the Aleutians as we go through the rest of tonight. High pressure out across eastern Siberia, 1,041 millibars there, working with high pressure across eastern and northern Alaska, 1,019 millibars. All of this is bitter cold. Temperatures there, as we saw this morning, anywhere from 50 to 60 below or worse. Low pressure just south of Kodiak at 977. Warm and wet airs working into southeast. No snow just yet in Haines, but that'll happen tonight. Out across the west, central, and eastern parts of the Aleutians looking at snow. As we get into tomorrow, early morning, 966 low there north and east of Kodiak. South of Seward, that's in prime position to create wind around Thompson Pass and many of our local passes in the Chugach, as well as Cook Inlet. We are planning for some heavy snow there in Kodiak. Again, something you haven't seen a whole lot of. 900 and let's see, I'm trying to remember what this number should be because 90 is not correct. I believe it was closer to 970, just south of southwestern parts of the outer coast of southeast. Periods of moderate to heavy rain will be working up through the Clarence Strait there, and we'll get blowing snow across the Alcan border, generally east of Tok and Chicken with that. High pressure also creating a good opportunity for some ice fog in the interior and the North Slope, again with temperatures still at very bitter cold levels there. Blowing snow around St. Lawrence Island and St. Paul and St. George with that high pressure ridge holding that moisture in place. Not a whole lot of snow, but certainly stuff that'll reduce your visibility. Getting into Saturday, low pressure is really sitting in place just south of the Kenai Peninsula and east of the Barrens, north of Kodiak at 981. That trough of low pressure working its way through the central and southern parts of southeast. Snow continues in the north, but generally north of Juneau. You can see a band of snow from the Chugach all the way just east of Healy up toward Fort Yukon and east again on the Richardson Highway. High pressure across the North Slope locks in low-level moisture. Areas of ice fog possible there, but again, not expecting a whole lot of precipitation. Snow showers across south and west and all the way through the Aleutians. As you look out across Sunday, colder air pushes a little bit further south. Still, a new area of low pressure is developing south of Adak. You can barely see it on the chart. Low pressure still hovering near Kodiak at 968. A new triple point develops in the eastern Gulf. This is working northward. It's going to keep things very unsettled across the north and eastern Gulf and maybe push some warmer weather north into the interior, which means a better chance of snow and milder temperatures. Not as cold, but certainly not warm just yet. Let's take a sneak peek at Saturday morning. You'll see temps in the mid-30s below zero around Fairbanks, colder west toward Tanana. And Galena, 50 below, 57 below for Arctic Village, 20s and 30s below for the North Slope. Southeast, 30 to 40 above. South Central, 0 to 10, 22 in Kodiak, teens and 20s for Southwest. As you look at Saturday afternoon, not a big change in temperature for Southeast. Sitka is only 41, the capital city about 40. Prince William Sound just above freezing, teens and 20s for South Central, 23 below in Eagle, 31 below in Fort Yukon, 44 below for Arctic Village, milder in Fairbanks at 22 below and close to 0 in Southwest.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. We expect to see IFR all the way across Southeast into the northern and interior parts of the Gulf Coast, into the upper ends of the Yukon Valley, the Tanana Valley, through Prince William Sound, and up into the Harding ice field there and over Seward. South of that, we'll see improving conditions, I think, around Kodiak Island after what will probably be, again, a pretty low period for snow and at least some poor visibility. Maybe, again, blizzard conditions as we go through the very late night hours into early Saturday morning before we start to see rapid improvement there in the weather. IFR from St. Lawrence Island through St. Matthew down to the Pribilofs and into parts of the Alaska Peninsula coastline and eastern chain, as well as areas on the North Slope extending out and south of Point Hope and maybe even Point Lay. As we get into Saturday afternoon, that won't change very much on the North Slope. Watch for areas around Kaktovik to be marginal and maybe even VFR right there at Point Barrow and just south into Utqiagvik itself. IFR across the higher train in southeast, still looking at IFR across the eastern interior, the upper Tanana Valley and parts of Prince William Sound, and back into Anchorage there as we look at another opportunity for precipitation. St. Lawrence Island into the Alaska Peninsula, no big changes there, and marginal conditions at least all the way through the end of the chain, but widespread VFR on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range and down into Southwest thanks to the bitter cold sticking around. No big change there on Sunday morning. Watch for marginal conditions to creep southward just a little bit toward the Brooks Range summits. St. Lawrence Island down to the central chain and the eastern end, still looking at widespread IFR, and that will rapidly increase as we go through your Sunday morning hours. Prince William Sound, the northern Gulf Coast, and again, most of Southeast still looking at IFR. Southern parts of the Inside Passage, maybe the outer coast looking at marginal weather there. And again, marginal conditions up through Southeast as we get into the afternoon. Higher train, Chugach all the way down to South Central. Kodiak Island once again, Bristol Bay and out toward the Pribilofs looking at increasing areas of IFR. Generally looking at some increasing regions of instrument flight rule probably from just north of Fairbanks and up toward Arctic Village, and then also the North Slope and the Chukchi Coast. So a lot of changes this afternoon. Sunday looks to see a lot more IFR than what we'll see on Saturday. For Saturday, though, your pass conditions, Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we expect to see marginal concerns there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass start to lean over toward marginal levels as we get into the end of the day. Rainy Pass goes over hard to IFR as we get into Saturday afternoon. Same goes for Windy Pass after a marginal start. Isabel Pass looking at IFR concerns. Mentasta Pass starts at IFR and should see some gradual improvement as we go throughout the day. Tanita Pass likely IFR most of your Saturday. Portage Pass looks to go over hard to IFR throughout most of Saturday and at least a little bit on Sunday. And Chilkoot and White Pass holding at IFR throughout your day. Freezing levels, no shock here. It looks like most of the state is going to be below freezing to start Saturday morning. The elevated freezing lines here anywhere from about 2,000 feet near Gustavus and Juneau to about 4,000 feet down around Haida Gwaii in the Dixon entrance. And again, the surface freezing line holding over the higher train and then jogging westward right around Yakutat to about Montague Island and east of Kodiak. So it's plenty cold out there. Icing potential really focuses on the north and eastern Gulf Coast. There is certainly a lot of cold air here, but it's the moisture at the right levels, of course, that we're really concerned about. And regions around Cook Inlet to the northern Gulf, Cape Fairweather, Icy Cape, all the way out toward about Port Alexander, south of Sitka, and into the Dixon entrance where we see some areas of considerable moderate possibly, and then isolated moderate at least across the upper end of the Yukon, the Tanana, through Prince William Sound and really most of Southeast. So icing potential there, certainly above 4,000 feet and below 9,000 feet on the northern end. The jet stream is crazy. It seems to be out of whack. This is really a violent pattern here with low pressure across the North Pacific at 155 to 160 knots on the westward side there. A brief ridge, another trough over the Gulf that's developing an area of low pressure here, and a strong push from the Arctic coming in around 110 knots over Bristol Bay. Jetlit here across the eastern parts of Alaska, 50 to 90 knots with the Arctic blast coming in there at 90 knots as well. A brief ridge, and then again a very violent turn southward across western parts of North America with a trough. This is a very, very active pattern. So at 9,000 feet, we have low pressure anchored across southwestern Alaska, very slow mover, and very sharp winds coming in from the north and east, 50 knots there over the Bering Strait, and westerlies on the south side, 35 to 40. Southerlies over southeastern Alaska. At 3,000 feet, there's our low once again. Northeasterlies on the northern side, 40 to 55 knots. Easterlies coming in with cold air across the north slope, 20 to 35. And you can see a strong southeasterly flow with the next system across the North Pacific and over the Aleutians. Turbulence then, widespread. Isolated severe across the west and northwest, Cook Inlet, and areas over the Alaska Peninsula. Considerable moderate, just as widespread. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is of course a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above. A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery. We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes. You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west. You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off. In the satellite imagery, since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system.
Right, right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human, so the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time, so the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is the Katmai eruption of 1912. huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past. And we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions. But now they're also protecting the general public with aviation-sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left-behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today. And you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Dehne at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.dehne.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your sea ice edge now. We continue to see improvement across the Bering Strait region, but there's still regions around and north of St. Lawrence Island that have open water. Heavy freezing spray will continue to be a widespread threat for a lot of the Bering Sea basin itself. We're still looking at high concentration ice moving out toward the northern and western edges of Nunivak Island, and on the south edge we still see marginal ice pushing its way through the Bristol Bay communities there in the southwestern Capes. We're going to continue to see changes there with colder air working its way to the west and south. Watch for continued ice growth through the weekend there, and also looking at more ice in northern parts of Cook Inlet. For the very latest information on the sea ice, head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. In southeast, look for gusty conditions inland canal, a gust of 40 knots there coming into the region, and again a winter storm warning above Haines, above 800 feet, so we're expecting to see cold and snow in the region there. Don't be surprised to run into that. 20 knots from the south and east through Stevens Passage and down to Clarence Strait. South and southwesterlies coming into the outer coast at 25 to 30, looking for 16 to 17 foot seas there on Saturday. On Sunday, a little bit more of a southerly flow coming in, 25 to 30, especially in the northern Gulf up toward Cape Fairweather and Icy Cape. Southeasterlies 15 to 25 on the inside passage with 3 to 6 foot seas through your Sunday. For South Central on Saturday, southeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 25 knots with 4 foot seas. Northeasterlies in northern Cook Inlet over some of the marginal ice we just saw. Southeasterlies light off the southern end of Cook Inlet, and then over the Barrens a strong northwesterly pull. 25 to 30 knots coming into low pressure here with 9 to 15 foot seas, 14 foot seas outside of Resurrection Bay. And then as we get into Prince William Sound on Sunday, easterlies at 30 knots with a 7 foot sea. North and easterly winds strengthening down the length of Cook Inlet, 20 to 40 knots there with the highest winds and seas well to the south. Southeasterlies coming into Seward and over the Barrens at 35 to knots or so, maybe even 40s. It pushes closer to western parts of Cook Inlet, and 12 to 14 foot seas there in the western Gulf as we go on Sunday. For Bristol Bay, northerlies 25 knots, 5 foot seas, 16 foot seas down the Alaska Peninsula and strengthening to 35 knots. Westerlies inside of Shelikof Strait with a 6 foot sea, 13 foot seas down the Pacific coastline at 25 to 30 knot winds sustained. North and easterly winds will strengthen off of Bristol Bay, 30 knots with 8 to 9 foot seas there on Sunday, and then low pressure wrapping in winds from the south and east into places like Chignik and Perryville, and more of a northeasterly flow as you go down toward the Shumagins, 15 foot seas expected there, and southeasterlies coming into Kodiak at 30 knots with a 16 foot sea. Northeasterlies remain strong in Shelikof Strait with an 11-foot sea on Sunday. For the Aleutians, a north and easterly flow strengthening out across the west with seas coming up to 23 feet west of Kiska to Shemya on that 45-knot wind. Gales, heavy freezing spray still possible in all these regions. 30 to 40 knots expected in many areas, especially to the north where the winds will be stronger. Sunday, winds continue to strengthen and move eastward a little bit, 40 to 45 knots with 25 to 26-foot seas south of Nikolsky to Atka. Northerlies outside of Unalaska and Nikolsky. 30 to 40 knots there as well, 15 to 25 south of the eastern chain. And northeasterlies continue to be strong. 25 knots or so expected from Adak to Shemya on that 40 to 45 knot flow. Across the west coast, northerlies 25 to 35 around the Bering Strait region. Northeasterlies at St. Matthew at 40 knots. Northerlies for St. Paul and St. George, 14-foot seas there on that 35-knot wind. Winds diminish a little bit around the Kuskokwim Delta for Sunday, down to 30 knots with a 7-foot sea, but remain strong all the way into the Bering Strait, 35 to 40, expecting 10 to 12-foot seas. 18-footers around St. Matthew with a northeasterly wind even stronger to your west. Across the Beaufort Seacoast, west and southwesterlies across the region, 15 to 25 all over the ice. North and northwesterlies coming into the Chukchi coast at 15 to 25. Again, over the ice. Stronger winds there with open water north of St. Lawrence Island. Watch again for heavy freezing spray. Winds pick up even more on Sunday, 40 knots with 12-foot seas, 15 to 25 over the Chukchi, and westerlies over the Beaufort, 15 to 20. All again blowing much colder air across the region and creating dangerous wind chills. Low pressure across the northern Gulf at 966 millibars will continue to bring in wind and rain to coastal areas, snow for higher terrain, some of that reducing visibility on land. Winter storm warnings for the Haines area and for Hyder for accumulating snow. Watch for periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain across lower terrain in southeast. More snow in south central and bitter cold for the interior and southwest with wind chill advisories, meaning levels there could be 45 to 55 below, and wind chill warnings 55 to 65 below for a feels like index across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast and the Brooks Range. So be extra careful out there, especially in the upper Kobuk and Noatak. As we go into Saturday, we see warmer weather moving northward, but it will still be very cold.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.